You're looking at buying a self-storage facility, and from the road it can seem almost absurdly simple. Rows of doors, a gate, a keypad, a small office, and hundreds of customers paying every month for space they hope they will not need forever. There is no kitchen, no dining room, no fashion inventory, and usually far fewer employees than you would expect in a business producing substantial rent. But that simplicity hides the real ownership problem. A storage property can be full of paying tenants and still produce disappointing cash flow if the owner overpays for the land, borrows too aggressively, underestimates lease up, misjudges local supply, or lets operating costs rise faster than rents. So the purchase price is only the first number that matters. The real question is how much usable cash remains after occupancy, pricing, property taxes, insurance, payroll, repairs, marketing, management, capital spending, and debt service all take their share. By the end, you'll understand how a self-storage facility earns money, what makes the economics attractive where a new owner can get trapped, and how to think about a realistic ownership model without confusing revenue with profit. Start with what you are actually buying. A self-storage business is part operating company and part commercial real estate. The customer is renting secure space, usually month to month, but the owner is also managing a property whose value depends on location, physical condition, access, competition, zoning, and future land use. That combination is powerful because the building itself can be valuable even when the day-to-day operation is simple. It is also dangerous because a bad real estate decision cannot be fixed with better customer service alone. If the facility is hidden behind an industrial park, difficult to enter from the road, surrounded by new competitors, or located where population growth is weak, the owner may have a beautiful set of empty units. That is why the first ownership decision is not unit size. It is whether to build, buy, or occasionally convert another property. A ground-up project gives you control over layout, unit mix, climate control, security, and technology, but it forces you to carry development risk before rent begins. You need land, design work, zoning and permits, site preparation, drainage, utilities, paving, buildings, doors, gates, cameras, fire protection where required, signage, software, and enough working capital to survive the period between opening and stabilization. In dense markets, a multi-story building may make better use of expensive land, but elevators, structural requirements, interior corridors, HVAC, life safety systems, and longer construction schedules can push the project into a very different cost category from a simple drive-up facility. Buying an existing property changes the risk rather than eliminating it. You can see actual rent rolls, occupancy, delinquency, maintenance history, tax bills, insurance costs, and local competition. You may also inherit under-market rents, weak online marketing, poor signage, an outdated gate system, deferred repairs, or a unit mix that no longer fits neighborhood demand. An acquisition can start producing cash immediately, but the buyer has to separate problems that are fixable from problems that are permanent. On this channel, that distinction is the center of every ownership breakdown. A business can look easy to operate while still being difficult to buy correctly. Self-storage is a good example because the visible operation is lean, yet the hidden economics are driven by real estate, financing, local demand, and pricing discipline. Now look at the revenue engine. The basic formula is rentable square footage multiplied by achieved rent, adjusted for occupancy, discounts, bad debt, and other income. That sounds mechanical, but every term moves. A 10 by 10 unit in one neighborhood may command a very different rate from the same unit 15 miles away. Climate-controlled space can be worth more where heat, humidity, or customer expectations justify it. Drive-up units can be more convenient for business users or households moving bulky items. Smaller units often produce a higher rent per square foot, while larger units may be easier to fill in markets where customers need household vehicle or commercial storage. Occupancy deserves special attention because owners can fool themselves with one impressive percentage. Physical occupancy tells you how much space is rented. Economic occupancy asks how much of the potential rent you are actually collecting after discounts, promotions, delinquency, and rate differences. A property can show high physical occupancy while still leaving revenue on the table if too many tenants are paying legacy rates far below current pricing. The opposite can happen too. An aggressive owner can push rent so hard that move-outs rise and occupancy weakens. The goal is not simply to fill every unit. It is to maximize durable revenue without creating a revolving door of customers. Large public operators show how important that balance is. Extra Space Storage reported year-end 2025 same-store square foot occupancy of 92.6%, while its average same-store occupancy for the year was higher. Its filing also showed that same-store operating expenses rose faster than same-store rental revenue in 2025, which pushed same-store net operating income lower. Public Storage described a similar environment of softer demand for storage space, lower move-in rates for new tenants, and cost pressure including property taxes. Those are useful reminders that even scaled operators with strong brands do not get a free pass from market conditions. For an independent owner, the main recurring costs usually begin with property taxes, insurance, utilities, repairs, payroll or management, marketing, software, security systems, gate maintenance, pest control, landscaping, snow removal where relevant, and administrative expense. Not every facility has the same stack. A remote managed property may use fewer on-site labor hours but spend more on technology, call handling, access control, and centralized systems. A climate-controlled building may earn higher rents, but also carries HVAC and energy exposure. A facility with elevators creates another maintenance system. A large paved site can create expensive resurfacing and drainage work that does not appear in a monthly profit snapshot. This is where net operating income becomes more useful than gross revenue. In property analysis, net operating income generally means property revenue minus ordinary property operating expenses before financing costs, income taxes, depreciation, and certain owner-level items. It tells you how the real estate operation performs before the buyer's specific capital structure enters the picture. But NOI is not the same as cash in the owner's pocket. If the buyer financed the acquisition, debt service still has to be paid. Major capital expenditures may also sit outside the ordinary operating expense line. An owner can therefore report healthy NOI and still experience tight cash flow. Public company results can illustrate the operating leverage without pretending that one small property will match them. Extra Space reported about $2.65 billion of same-store rental revenue and roughly $764 million of same-store operating expenses for 2025, leaving about $188 billion of same-store NOI. That is an operating expense ratio below 30% for that large stabilized portfolio. It would be a mistake to copy that percentage directly into a small independent acquisition. Scale, property mix, management systems, insurance structure, taxes, labor, and accounting treatment can all differ. The lesson is that storage can be operationally lean. Not that every storage facility automatically earns a 70% NOI margin. Then comes the expense that is easiest to underestimate because it is invisible after stabilization, lease-up. A new facility opens with debt, taxes, insurance, and maintenance obligations already running, while many units may still be empty. Revenue arrives gradually. Marketing has to create awareness. Search rankings take time. Introductory promotions may reduce early collections. Competitors can answer a new opening with discounts of their own. A project that looks excellent at 90% occupancy may be uncomfortable at 40 or 50% occupancy, especially if the construction loan begins amortizing before the property reaches its expected revenue level. A prudent development model therefore needs a monthly lease-up schedule rather than one stabilized annual number. Ask how many net rentals the facility needs each month. Ask what happens if move-ins are slower, achieved rents are lower, or the opening is delayed. Ask whether the reserve is large enough to cover operating deficits and debt service while occupancy grows. The danger is not that the stabilized property never works. The danger is running out of cash before it gets there. Marketing is another reason the business is not truly passive. Storage demand is local and frequently urgent. Customers search because they are moving, renovating, downsizing, clearing an estate, storing business inventory, returning from school, or dealing with another life transition. The facility has to appear when that need occurs. That means a functioning website, accurate local listings, responsive phone handling, online rentals, reviews, signage, and often paid search. A small operator competing against national brands cannot assume that a cheaper monthly rate will compensate for being invisible online. Ancillary income can improve the economics, but it should not be treated as magic. Operators may sell locks and packing supplies. Some provide tenant protection or insurance-related products through structures that vary by company and state. Others earn management fees, truck-related revenue, administration charges, or specialized storage income. Extra Space's 2025 filing, for example, separately reported substantial tenant reinsurance revenue and management fee income at the corporate level. Public Storage also reports ancillary operations including tenant reinsurance, merchandise, and third-party management. Those lines prove that storage companies can monetize more than rent, but they do not tell you what one independent facility will earn from those activities. Lien sales are even easier to misunderstand. When a tenant stops paying, state self-storage laws can provide a process for enforcing the operator's lien against stored property. But notice periods, advertising requirements, sale procedures, military protections, and other details vary by jurisdiction. The economic purpose is generally to resolve a delinquent account and return the unit to rentable inventory, not to build a business plan around discovering valuable contents. An owner who treats the legal process casually can create far more risk than the unpaid rent is worth. Financing changes everything because storage is often purchased as commercial real estate. A lender will care about the property's income, occupancy, borrower equity, debt service coverage, market conditions, appraisal, and the quality of the asset. Terms vary by transaction and credit environment. The important point is that leverage magnifies both outcomes. If NOI rises after an acquisition, debt can help the owner earn a stronger return on invested equity. If NOI falls while debt service stays fixed, the same leverage can erase cash flow quickly. Cap rates are useful here, but only if you understand what they do. A capitalization rate relates a property's NOI to its value. Divide NOI by the cap rate and you get an implied value. A property producing $300,000 of annual NOI would be valued at $5 million at a 6% cap rate. At a 7% cap rate, the same NOI implies roughly $4.29 million. Nothing about the building changed in that calculation. The market's required yield changed. That is why an owner can improve operations and still face a disappointing sale if market cap rates move higher. The opposite is also true. Buying a weak property at the right price can create room for improvement. Perhaps rents have not been adjusted for years. Maybe the website is poor. Maybe delinquency is unmanaged, calls are missed, or online rental is unavailable. The owner may improve collections, occupancy, marketing, unit mix, and pricing. But there is a limit to operational heroics. You cannot digitally market your way out of severe oversupply. You cannot raise rents indefinitely in a neighborhood where new competitors have hundreds of empty units. And you cannot refinance into a healthy balance sheet if the property never produces enough income. The broader industry is still fragmented even though the largest operators are enormous. One 2025 public filing, citing the Self-Storage Almanac, described roughly 65,000 primary self-storage facilities and about 2.4 billion rentable square feet in the United States. It also said the 5 largest publicly listed storage companies collectively operated only about 1/5 of U.S. properties. At the same time, Public Storage ended 2025 with interest in 3,271 U.S. facilities, and Extra Space said it owned or operated 4,281 stores. That combination explains why the sector attracts both institutions and individual owners. Scale matters, but thousands of properties remain outside the biggest platforms. Scale also reveals what professional operators spend money on. Public Storage said property taxes were one of the drivers of higher operating costs in 2025. Extra Space's same store expense table shows payroll, marketing, repairs, and maintenance, property taxes, and insurance as distinct cost lines. These are not theoretical deductions in a spreadsheet. They are recurring claims on rent. The quieter a facility looks from the street, the easier it is to forget how many systems have to work behind the gate. Consider a simplified ownership model. This is not a forecast, and it is not a claim about what a particular market will produce. Assume a 40,000 square foot facility is 90% occupied and averages $18 of annual rent per occupied square foot after normal pricing effects. Base rental revenue would be about $648,000. Add no ancillary income at all, so the model stays conservative. If ordinary property operating expenses consume 40% of revenue, NOI would be about $388 to $800. If annual debt service were $300,000, the property would leave about $8,800 before income taxes. Owner-level overhead and major capital expenditures now change only 2 assumptions. Occupancy falls to 82% and achieved annual rent slips to $17 per occupied square foot. Base revenue falls to about $550 to $7,600. If the expense ratio rises to 43% because many costs do not fall with occupancy, NOI becomes roughly $317,800. With the same $300,000 of debt service, only about $17,800 remains before those other claims. The property did not become empty. It is still more than 4/5 occupied, yet the owner's cash cushion nearly disappeared. That is the financial contradiction at the center of storage ownership. This simplified example also explains why experienced buyers stress test deals. They do not ask only what the property earns today. They ask what happens if rent growth stalls, insurance renews higher, taxes reset after a sale, repairs arrive early, a competitor opens nearby, or refinancing costs more than expected. They model a downside case before they celebrate the upside case. A storage property does not need a dramatic collapse to hurt its owner. A few ordinary disappointments can combine into a serious cash flow problem. Development has its own version of the same risk. Public Storage's 2025 filing shows hundreds of millions of dollars of development and redevelopment activity and millions of square feet added across its portfolio. That is institutional scale, not a budget for one project, but it demonstrates how capital-intensive new supply can be. The smaller developer faces the same categories with less room for error: land basis, construction pricing, permitting, interest carry. Opening delays, lease-up speed, and local demand. Site selection may be the most unforgiving decision of all. Storage customers value proximity and convenience. A feasibility study should therefore examine the trade area rather than rely on citywide population headlines. Existing rentable square footage, projects under construction, approved projects, household growth, renter share, home size, moving activity, road access, visibility, income, and competitor pricing all matter. A fast-growing metro can still contain an oversupplied submarket. Cheap land can be expensive if it creates a facility that never reaches the rent or occupancy needed to support its capital cost. Management style also changes the economics. An owner-operator may keep more cash because there is no third-party management fee, but that does not make the labor free. Someone still has to answer calls, reconcile payments, handle customer disputes, monitor security, coordinate repairs, manage delinquency, supervise vendors, update pricing, and keep online listings accurate. A professionally managed facility converts some of that workload into a visible expense. A self-managed facility can hide the same cost inside the owner's time. Technology reduces labor but does not eliminate responsibility. Online leasing, automated gates, digital locks, cameras, remote call centers, dynamic pricing, and centralized customer service can allow one person or one team to oversee more units. They also create dependency on software, internet connections, payment systems, access hardware, and cybersecurity practices. The business becomes less about sitting behind a counter and more about maintaining a reliable system. So what should a buyer care about before making an offer? Start with trailing operating statements and rent rolls, then reconcile them to bank deposits or other reliable records. Study occupancy by unit type, achieved rent, promotions, delinquency, tenant tenure, and rate increases. Review tax history, insurance, utilities, payroll, repair records, and deferred maintenance. Inspect roofs, pavement, drainage, doors, gates, elevators, HVAC, lighting, fencing, cameras, and fire or life safety systems where applicable. Confirm zoning and expansion rights, then analyze local competitors and future supply. A seller's current NOI matters, but the durability of that NOI matters more. The exit deserves the same discipline. Storage value is influenced by NOI, market cap rates, asset quality, location, growth prospects, financing conditions, and buyer demand. Improving NOI can increase value, but appreciation should not be confused with operating profit. A sale can also bring transaction costs, taxes, and loan payoff obligations. The owner's return therefore comes from a combination of cash flow during the hold, changes in debt balance, and whatever equity remains at sale. None of those should be treated as guaranteed. The current public company data also argues against calling storage recession-proof or effortless. Large operators continue to report high occupancy, but they also disclose competition, seasonal demand changes, expense growth, insurance exposure, property tax pressure, and the possibility of weaker rental rates. Storage demand can be resilient for many reasons, yet resilience is not immunity. A particular facility can still suffer from bad construction timing, local oversupply, poor access, weak management, or excessive debt. That is why the best description of self-storage ownership is not passive income. It is a relatively lean operating business sitting on top of a capital-intensive real estate decision. The doors and hallways are simple. The underwriting is not. The owner has to get the land or purchase price right, finance it responsibly, understand the trade area, manage occupancy and pricing, control operating expenses, reserve for capital work, and survive the periods when revenue does not follow the optimistic model. If the numbers survive that process, self-storage can be an attractive ownership model because it combines many small monthly customers with a real estate asset and a comparatively streamlined operation. But the winning property is not automatically the one with the most doors, the highest asking rents, or the cheapest land. It is the one where demand, pricing, expenses, financing, and capital costs fit together with enough margin for mistakes. That is the quiet truth behind the rows of metal doors. The business may look boring from the outside, but the owner's result is determined by dozens of financial decisions happening behind the gate.